Entonces, es un inicio, there's less people. It's gotta be operating. So she pressed A on how the pole. There goes. Oh God. No. I did forget what the other were. I'm doing five. That's that one. I'm doing five. Was it really? Yeah.
Okay, welcome back and happy Wednesday. Let's go ahead and get started for the day. So today we're getting into another theory that will be really useful as we're talking about our human communication. We've particularly noticed this one online, it will be social information processing theory. I want to give you a few reminders as we get into some of the later weeks of the course. First of all, as a reminder, your theory reflection is due by this Sunday at midnight. Remember, that's asking you to pick one of the theories that we've talked about in these first 3 weeks and kind of relate it to your own lived experiences and perspective. So I've already received a couple rough drafts and outlines from people. They're optional, but if you're kind of concerned about your grade and score going in, I'm happy to review, let you know what you're working on and if you're on the right track. If you do intend to send an optional draft or outline, try to get that to me by Friday at the latest so that I can return that to you. And then on Monday, I posted the schedule for the presentations, right? So the presentations starting next week are basically going to go for each class meeting up until the end of the quarter. So we'll have typically one, sometimes two, that will just be an addition to our class meetings going forward. So what I'd like you to do is to just take a little bit of time on your own here to think about, first of all, for the theory reflection assignment that's due on Sunday, what is the theory that you have selected for this assignment? Or if you're not sure yet, what are some theories that you're deciding team, right? So some of the theories that we've talked about, like uncertainty reduction theory, social exchange theory, social penetration theory, those are all options to consider. Today's theory, social information processing, is another candidate. Agenda setting theory for Friday's class, one you might also consider. What are some key ideas or concepts that you've chosen to kind of use in your reflection? And lastly, how is the theory that you have chosen or you're thinking about choosing relevant to your own life? So I'll give you a little bit of time to think about and brainstorm here. Give you about 2 or 3 more minutes here. Okay, so go ahead and finish your sentence or thought. So this will be a repeat for people who take interviewing with me. I wanted to do a finger poll to see how people are feeling about this assignment, right? So 5 fingers means you are completely confident, you know exactly what you're doing. You might have even developed an outline or draft already. 1 is, I have no idea what I'm going to write about or do. 3 is somewhere in between. I've got a general idea, but I do need a little bit more time to focus. Between 1 to 5, where are you with regard to this one? Okay, see a lot of 2s, a lot of 3s, somewhere in between. So that's great, right? I appreciate you taking the time to think about and brainstorm this. You don't need to turn this in. This is your own reference and work, so you can hang on to this and use this as you're continuing to work on preparing for this one. What I recommend that you do is to just think about the theory that stands out to you, maybe even just take a day or two and like imagine this theory as it's playing out. So you're, coming to class, you're talking after class. How might uncertainty reduction theory explain the way that you're communicating? So one good way to prepare for this assignment is to just like take a day to imagine this theory explaining some of the things that are going on in your life. I just wanted to just briefly remind you here for this assignment. Theory reflection, right, is asking you to pick one of the theories, just 1.5 to 2 pages, so pretty short, and just to take some time to discuss how this theory is relevant to your life experiences. Make sure to include works cited and in text. So last week, symbolic interaction, uncertainty reduction, social exchange. This week, we talked on Monday about social penetration, talking about social information processing today, and agenda setting on Friday. So pick one of those theories to use for this one. You can go over the 2 pages. There's no penalty for doing that, just so long as the content is relevant that you're adding in, right? So if you have more to say that fits, great. In kind of receiving a couple of the rough drafts and outlines so far, one thing I'd encourage is just to try to get as specific examples from your life as you can, right? So perhaps you might describe an interaction between you and your roommate that shows the different elements of uncertainty reduction, and also make sure that you're kind of capturing some of the key concepts or ideas. So for example, if you're talking about uncertainty reduction theory, right, this is a theory built on different axioms. So you might identify a couple of axioms. For example, we tend to express ourselves more non-verbally as uncertainty decreases. And you might say, I noticed in talking to my roommate, they were very expressive, they gestured a lot, they pointed, they were very dynamic, and that showed the level of comfort that we had in our relationship, right? This should not be a super long, intensive, or scary assignment, but I'm happy to look at a rough draft or outline and happy to help you if you're hitting a wall or just need any extra support as you're doing that. So again, do take some time to think a little bit about this and where you're at, right? Last class, we talked a little bit about the presentation coming up. We also talked about social penetration theory and the ways in which SPT can be used in our lives, right? Think about this theory if you ever find yourself forgetting, right? This is the Shrek theory. This is the onion theory, right? Like an onion, people have layers, and what they choose to disclose and share with people is based on the layer of the onion, the level of connection that you have with that other person, right? And as we've discussed, we move between different stages. So generally speaking, we reach kind of stable stage that leads to complete openness and comfort in our relationships. So today I want to talk a little bit more about the presentation schedule, just so we're all on the same page there in preparation for that assignment, so you know exactly what we're looking for. Talk about social information processing theory and its application for communication. So I posted on Canvas on Monday the presentation schedule based on the scheduling restrictions that you sent on the Google form. So if you do know that you have a conflict, please let me know as soon as possible so that I can reschedule you. So on the day that you're scheduled to present, I'm asking 6 to 8 minutes, where again, you are picking an outside scholarly source like a journal article or book chapter. We've done a few examples of this in class that is using your assigned theory in some way, right? So maybe you're looking at cultural studies, and there's an application of cultural studies to understand communication about the environment. Cool. So what you're not being asked to do in this assignment is to explain the theory, right? That's my job. Your job is to explain how this outside article, first of all, has its own key ideas, is connected to the theory that you're assigned for that day, and explains what you gain from that article. And make sure that you're including the citation in your presentation. Great starting points might be the EOU library. Just do a search for your theory. That can be a really good place to start so that you're starting to look through various articles. JSTOR, again, is a really good database. They can also do keyword searches if you like paste larger content. Google Scholar works really well too. And I encourage you, if you're having trouble finding an article that fits for your theory, to reach out to me and I can help you to find one that might work for you. Also, make sure that you are doing something either like a slideshow or a written outline that you might send to me prior. If you're doing something like a slideshow or presentation, that way I can have it pulled up for you as you're giving the presentation. Otherwise, you don't need to use that. That can be, an outline can be a good way to prepare for that too. So some tips as you're thinking about and preparing for this one, right? First of all, one good thing to do is just to practice, like doing just a quick run on your own. The big thing that I noticed in a lot of presentations, and that's just not necessarily limited to students, that's presentations more generally. A lot of people are very top heavy. They'll add a lot of content early on and they think, oh, I've got so much time. And then there's so much content at the end that they can't get to. So I encourage you to practice timing and pacing yourself. This isn't public speaking. This isn't about your formal speaking ability, but I do want you to really work on trying to get that content you want to share in that 6 to 8 minutes. One good way to do this for yourself is just to kind of practice and see how long does this part of my presentation take? How long does this part take, right? So that you have a visual sense of, okay, by the time I'm at slide number 5, I know that I have about 3 minutes remaining. Find online articles, right, that explicitly mention or utilize your theory in some fashion, right? So again, a really easy starting point. The fact that there are so many autofills, right? So there's a lot of different things we could look at in terms of social information processing. There's this interesting article here from 1990 about how social information processing theory can explain aggressive behavior in children. That seems like a good application or use case here, right? Another good starting point, right? Here's one about how social information processing is used in the organizational structure of media, right? One challenge is that not all of the articles are necessarily going to be accessible. So you're going to want to find one that can be accessed through EOU library database or through something like JSTOR, right? One thing you should absolutely not under any circumstances do is attempt to use a website such as Sci-Hub, in which you enter the name of the article and it creates a PDF of the article. Whatever you do not do that. Do not do that, do not do that. You've never heard what that name of the website is, so you have no idea what I'm talking about. As you're doing that, take a moment to figure out what the key findings are, right? First of all, how does the topic that they're choosing to focus on enhance our knowledge of the theory? We look at how social information processing is related to aggression in children. We might learn more about social information processing at different developmental stages. Very different things happen in terms of children's behavior. For instance, my sister's middle school teacher talks about how, a lot of middle schoolers like to do like TikTok trends where they will utterly destroy and vandalize bathrooms and then post a video about it, right? So perhaps we'll learn more about online engagement as a result of this topic. And how does the theory enhance our knowledge of the topic? In other words, this theory helps us to explain the relationships that people are forming online. You might consider, although you don't necessarily have to structure into 3 body points. First of all, what are the key ideas of the outside article? How is this connected to the theory that you were assigned for the day? And third of all, what do we learn from this article too? Again, if you check on the announcements, the presentation schedule, that's here, right? So we'll start on Monday with spiral of silence theory. So I just encourage you just to review again. The day is corresponding with the theory you're being asked to cover here. And then if you are one of multiple people on a day, that's fine, right? That just might mean that you and the other person pick a different theory, or perhaps you find the same theory or the same outside article and both choose to focus on that. So that's that schedule. Again, let me know if you see any issues with the schedule. Okay. Any questions on either the reflection assignment or on the presentation? Again, don't think about this as a big scary presentation where you're asked to like tell us everything about the theory. This is instead just something that adds to our understanding of the theory. Okay, now we spent a lot of time covering that, so let's go ahead and dive into social information processing theory. So SIP, so this theory is about our interpersonal communication, but it's about our interpersonal communication online through the use of media, right? Interpersonal communication is not necessarily face-to-face. It can happen through a phone call, through video call, through Zoom. And what this theory is arguing is that in an online settings, we can actually have a lot of satisfaction. We can have meaningful lives and meaningful experiences. And this theory even argues that there are circumstances in which online relationships can be more impactful or be more meaningful than face-to-face interactions. So this is something we'll want to talk a little bit about. We might not agree about, but this is something that this theory is bringing to the table. So you might be familiar with the game Second Life, right? Which former faculty Tony Anderson has taught a number of courses that utilize Second Life. You might be familiar with playing like a similar type of online game. This is an example here about how a lot of online communities and games are chances of people forming those relationships. Another good example here, if you were like me and like COVID hit and you were looking for an escape, I played a lot of Animal Crossing on my Switch, right? I played like online, we visit each other's islands. That might be another example of how these kind of online communities can develop and form. So this theory comes from Joseph Walther from UCSB, who is a communication scholar. Interestingly, SIP actually came before a lot of the forms of social media that we have now, right? So in many ways, Walther was kind of predicting how some of this technology was going to be utilized. So here on the right, we got Club Penguin, RIP. This was an example of like some of the forms of like online community, right? The game was you would kind of go on and you do like little fun mini games, you like throw snowballs at each other. You had these little penguin avatars that you created. Growing up, and again, I might be dating myself as a millennial, but I played a lot of Neopets growing up, right? That was like a game where you had these virtual pets that you created and there was online community associated with that. All that to say, right, computer-mediated communication is providing a lot of opportunities to connect with people, right? Sometimes you're playing a game together, sometimes you're part of a community or chat or server, and online communities are motivated to form favorable impressions of themselves to others, right? When we talked about catfishing and some of the challenges of presenting online, one of the benefits to doing that is that you basically get to present a version of yourself online that you'd like to share. It's as easy as saying, okay, what is my profile picture going to be on something like Instagram, Facebook, or TikTok, right? What do people see when they go to me? What have I chosen that fits the moment? Right? You might have people who like spend hours trying to get the right pose or take the right photo and pick between them, or even edit a photo to make the version of themselves they want to share look good. somebody's creating something like a dating profile online, right? They like want to create a Tinder or Hinge profile, right? What are the photos they're choosing? Sometimes they choose a professional one and then a fun one because they want to show the different sides of themselves. All that to say, right? In online settings, we have the unique ability to manage our impressions with other people. They get to see what we choose to have them see. Now, that assumes we, of course, have the ability to decide what people get to see. One of the challenges we've seen a lot, right, is the idea of kind of leaking, right, where people will have like photos, personal information leaked or doxed. So it's not always coming from the person and their agentic decisions, but a lot of times we have the opportunity to make decisions about how we present ourselves to other people. An online interpersonal relationship, right? That is a relationship that you form with another person online. That can take a lot of time and messages. It can take a lot of work to get to the level of intimacy and involvement that you might see in face-to-face relationships. That comes back to the importance of nonverbal communication, right? We've talked about in this class that nonverbal communication can be up to like 90% of how we communicate, because things like our tone of voice, our gestures, our facial expressions, our use of space and proximity to each other, all of those things can really help to develop shortcuts and help to develop trust. If you've spent time with somebody face to face, you come to understand and work with them effectively, that avoids a lot of anxiety and uncertainty. Compare that to like something online, right? Where maybe you've met somebody through a group where you both share interests. It's taking some time to understand who that person is, to exchange messages, to feel comfortable with them, and to figure out if they are who they really say they are. Because again, we see a lot of issues with fraudulent content, people being dishonest online, and so on. Another thing we might consider are how some of these relationships can alternate between starting online, right, and moving to face-to-face, which can oftentimes happen, or relationships that begin face-to-face, but for whatever reason, need to move in an online or remote capacity, either permanently or temporarily, right? I had a friend of a friend who they ended up marrying somebody that they first messaged on Xbox Live, right? So there can be relationships that can start from that point, right? On the flip side, perhaps you have close friends, people you grew up with, who now live very far away, so you've had to manage that shift too, right? All that to say, online relationships, according to this theory, can take a lot more time and work to develop because they don't have the same nonverbal shortcuts that face-to-face communication does. So there's a film that came out a few years ago that I think does a great job of capturing some of the fundamentals of social information processing theory called Her. Is there anybody who's had the chance to see this one before or heard about this one? So the premise of this film is kind of interesting, right? We have the main character here, Joaquin Phoenix, who you might know as the Joker. So his character, right, lives in a kind of near future society. And the premise of this film is that he starts communicating with like an AI voice, right? So the only way that he can communicate with this person, this virtual person, is through just audio communication. And over the course of kind of talking to this AI, who like learns from him, learns more about humans, right? He comes to develop very deep and also like very romantic feelings for this AI voice, right? So it's not a person, it doesn't have a physical form, it's just a voice, it's just a sound. And through the process of communication, developing comfort and rapport, right? The development and intensification of feelings is something like that. So I wanted to share a clip from this that I think does a good job of explaining these ideas.
Good morning, Theodore. Morning. You have a meeting at 5. You want to try getting you back? Get up. Theodore, I saw you in the company breakup this morning.
You're kind of nosy.
Remember? You'll get used to it.
She's not writing this one. When I talk to her, I feel like she's.
Learning, you know, everything, I want to cover myself.
I love that for you too.
So kind of an interesting and like a little bit dystopian social message, right? You know, he carries around like this operating system wherever he goes, starts to really connect with this voice and like she's a human being, right? This is an example here of social information processing, the deep and then kind of intensifying feelings that we can experience online, hopefully with a real person. So some key ideas here that are connected, first of all, is the idea of strategic disclosure. So sometimes we choose to share specific information with people online in an effort to get to know people better. For example, are you in a forum or space or community in which people share their real photos, people use their real names, or do people have something like a username or alias that they use that they might choose to break down later, right? We put up a lot more walls in online settings than we might face to face. Social presence theory is relevant to SIP because it's this idea that media is a way that we make each other aware, right? So if you have a social media profile, somebody does a Google search of your name, there's a good chance that that profile is going to show up. So it's this idea that media is a means by which people can come to understand and know who we are. There's also what's known as media richness theory. This is also connected insofar as the idea that the more senses media engages with, the more meaningful that it is, right? So on one extreme, we have something like sending somebody an email, right? Or sending somebody a text in a very asynchronous way. And over time, we can move into kind of more moderate, something like a phone call, towards something that can be very connected, something like a video call. And we'll see what ends up happening with AI. I suspect that it might be used more in like using virtual reality to do like some type of more live style video interview. There's a lot of shows that will do like holograms, like if you've seen Star Wars, right? They have the like holograms of people communicating with each other as if they're there. I'm guessing something like that's on the horizon, which will be even more extreme on media richness. So the hyper-personal perspective is something that SIP is arguing here. It's the idea that according to this perspective, online relationships can be more intimate or even more meaningful than face-to-face relationships. Again, her is an example of this. He is constantly walking around with this AI. He's talking to her all the time. He's sharing a lot of his life with her. And that's one of the benefits, right, to using technology is that, if you're meeting somebody face-to-face, like a friend in the class or like a roommate, right, you don't see them when you're traveling or you've got other things going on in your life. So there can be distance there. So we don't see the same thing with regard to online communication, right? People can continue to text, they can continue to engage with each other well outside the boundaries of when face-to-face encounters might end. And then there's also the practice of warranting, right? That is when somebody verifies the legitimacy of information that's sent online, showing that they are who they say they are. One easy way to do that is like through something like a video call, right? So maybe you've been messaging somebody for a few weeks and you decide you really want to make sure this person is, not a serial killer or looks like they do in their photos, and they do that. The idea of misleading is very common online, not just in terms of people who are like blatantly catfishing, which is less common, but what's more common is people who like kind of slightly distort themselves. For example, maybe people are unhappy with how their appearance has changed over the last few years. And so the photo that they use is several years old, right? They use a photo of a younger version of themselves when they looked a way that they might have preferred to look, right? So sometimes there are just little things like that, or just little inaccuracies, like people claiming their height is higher than it is, their weight is lower than it is, right? People doing smaller things like that the warranting process can help us to work around too. There's also the idea in terms of how we engage with identity of possessing three different selves, right? These selves refer first to the actual self, right? That's who we really are, right? What are the things about ourselves that are true and correct about each other as people? An ideal, so who would we look like in a perfect world, right? All else equal, who would we like to be? If you've ever seen the classic movie 13 Going on 30, right? An example of a character who like wants to grow up and is tired of being a teenager, wakes up the next day, right? And she's a 30-year-old, I believe played by Rachel McAdams, right? It's like, wow, I'm 30 now, right? Sometimes we want our age to be different, we want to look a different way. We want to achieve something we haven't achieved. And then we kind of negotiate between those two things our ought self, right? We recognize that we're not necessarily going to be like perfect. We're not going to, have all the things that we want, but there might be a few things that we could do or change that can bring us closer to that idea. Based on the resources, what we have available to us, who do we think we should be? And that's especially important as we present ourselves online. For example, somebody, wants to be more confident, but the way that they express themselves online reflects a lot more confidence and charisma than they might have face-to-face. So social information processing, right? It's a good theory. It's useful in a lot of situations. I think that the context of COVID-19 over the last 2 or 3 years has put a lot of perspective on this theory and the limits of theory. If you think about like a lot of the era pre-COVID, discussing the role of media and technology, there's a lot of optimism, right? That technology, mediated communication, things like Zoom, like they can do a whole lot. They can bring us very close together. They can, connect people. And there are a lot of cases in which that's true. But I do think that especially in like being in quarantine and forced to do a lot of things through distance, I'm sure a lot of you are like incredibly sick of Zoom by now. The limits of that have been realized. A lot of us have come to value and really enjoy face-to-face communication, having lost a lot of that for an extended period of time, right? So one of the critiques of social information processing theory is that it's a difficult one to test, right? How are theories developed? Well, they're developed through the process of testing, retesting, evaluating, and understanding the theory better. Social information processing theory is suggesting a very extended sequence of how we come to develop our relationships in online settings, which has meant that a lot of the studies and use of that theory has been through kind of more extended, more qualitative interview or longitudinal studies. So it's a lot more difficult to test and kind of understand this theory. Secondarily, like as I mentioned, there are some things that just can't be replicated online, right? The feel of face-to-face communication, experience of things like touch, right? And a lot of us who have experienced exhaustion through things like Zoom has come as a result of nonverbal communication being more difficult to convey. When you're in a tiny rectangle and you're trying to understand how people are communicating in that tiny rectangle, that can be a lot harder for our brains. We have to work extra hard to understand nonverbal communication in a two-dimensional space. And our engagement, including our engagement online, can be factored by a lot of things that are about more than just impression management, right? Our decisions on how we present ourselves online, those are not always by choice, right? Sometimes things can be public or shared by members of a community in a way that, are not done with consent. One area that this is talked about a lot is in like disability-related communities, right? So there are a lot of parents of people with disabilities who might choose to post, share, circulate things about their kids. That's not always done with the kid's consent, right? So it's disclosing and sharing a disability that their kid has, but not really checking in with the kid. And then, fast forward years later, and there's a lot of personal information that now adult has to deal with because their parents shared that online. So that can be a challenge, right, in terms of the role of consent. But we might also choose to share online, not necessarily to manage or modulate our impressions of other people, but sometimes we post completely anonymously, right? Sometimes there are forums or settings where people have done that. 4chan is an absolute dumpster fire, but the origin of that website was the idea of creating a forum in which people could post anonymously. And then, the internet happened. So as an application of this theory, we can look at Second Life, right, which was developed in 2013 as an online community. And as an example of SIP in terms of the popularity of games, the ability to create and use an online avatar, and engage online through the use of that avatar too. Right? You could do a variety of games, you could do activities, you could meet people online and do things online in that space that were particularly unique. So in kind of looking at this and the different steps, right, that people can do and how easy it is to be on there, right, it's a chance for people to kind of create these avatars, create these characters, and engage with each other. If we think about other things like games that have a character creator, or you've ever played something like D&D, right, where people get to create their avatars, there's a whole other theory and kind of span of discussion we can have about how people will use like a pseudonymous identity or like create a different version of themselves. Like sometimes people's avatars will be a different gender or kind of different, will look different than them as a way of like exploring their different elements of identity. People do that too, but for the purposes of this theory, I think it's useful to understand some of these online communities as a way of people connecting, engaging, doing things with each other online. So given that, I'm going to have you all take some time to discuss in groups for your attendance today. First of all, what might be an example of close interpersonal relationships that might develop online? Second of all, does your group feel like online relationships can develop more deeply than face-to-face relationships? Why or why not? And then lastly, how does your group feel about the persuasiveness of this theory? Is this a theory you think makes a lot of sense to you, or there's some things that you kind of disagree about with regard to this theory? So let's go ahead and we'll do a group of 1, 2, and 3. We'll do 1, 2, 3, and 4. We'll do 1, 2, and 3. 1, 2, and 3. We'll do 1, 2, 3, and 4, and 1, 2, 3, and 4. Take some time, have one person write or type for your group, and talk a little bit about these questions. Yeah, have one person who might write or type for your group.
What's your name?
Yeah.
Would like Ready Player One count as an example?
Yeah, like a mediated example or like a way that builds like hyper-personal or online relationships. Yeah.
I don't think yeah, I know there's a lot of I think that might be something that we haven't discussed.
People play games. And that's like make your own avatar. You have to look at the theory.
I can never.
Every second. Yeah.
Yeah, one of my. I remember earlier, you didn't have to say that. Like,
Yeah.
Wire one.
Whoa. So, and or as so originally started, we were talking online. It was, and then went on, so I feel like it can. And I would agree with certain, but I think that some, because they don't go around. I think that's why we am.
Yeah, because I'm at my current profile, like,
And I was more.
like another argument.
Oh. Yeah. Yeah, like I don't like it. I don't like the fact that we'll meet each other, we'll live together.
Yeah.
That's always like the end goal for them. We'll take all more of that.
Yeah.
And then what's the deeper life? Yeah.
I do think that one, like, I guess, shortcoming is that, like, there's also that argument that, like, this is something
Generally, it's.
electronic devices.
Yeah, it's.
Yeah.
There's not like that. I'm gonna stay right now. Oh, they got whatever. Where there was just something.
So take about 2 or 3 more minutes. And then we have some more discussion here.
Yeah. Let's do that, like, talk about it message. They would, like, rewrite the message, but it's just, like,
Yeah.
multiple responses.
We can't just sit there. Oh, yeah. By yourself. He makes a channel.
All right. Sounds like discussions are about wrapped up here. So thank you for taking the time to talk about this a little bit. So let's start up here in the front. What was an example that you all came up with of interpersonal communication online?
We use Ready Player One as an example
Mhm.
because you can create relationships through virtual reality.
Yeah, right. So this is a film that came out a few years ago, where the premise of this one is that people have these like online avatars and they're kind of placed in this competition where using these characters, they have to kind of move through and like solve a variety of different challenges. Again, kind of looking at how people can connect and relate to each other, do activities and challenges online. So let's talk a little bit, maybe from the group back here, how do you all feel about do you feel like online relationships can be deeper than face-to-face, whatever, where do you all fall on that? Yeah.
You feel like in a way it can be deeper because like without that like face-to-face present or like the like idea of like the covering like online, you can like be more bold and like it takes away like what they're gonna like react. You can just say it and like they have a second to process it, or you can like edit it as it comes.
Yeah, yeah. So the ability to like edit and like feel that you were representing yourself and your thoughts. Sometimes people feel like, you know, they're trying to express their points, but it doesn't come out coherently face-to-face versus online, right? You can have a more thought out and developed communication through that setting, which can help. And how about this group of three over here? How did you feel about the persuasiveness of this theory?
I thought it was pretty persuasive, but it's not like the end all be all.
Mhm.
It's like the biggest thing I understand.
Yeah. It's something that can be used to enhance our lives, right? It can help us when we're engaging online and we have communities or groups that share interests with us. But we also, again, if you've noticed, the last couple of years, take a lot of value in our face-to-face relationships, connection. There's something we do feel like we're missing too. So we have a lot of opportunities to connect and keep connections open, but you know, there are limits to how we can communicate in that capacity. And again, one of the interesting things about seeing these theories is to see some of the ways that they all will continue to change as technology changes. I am certain we're going to have more in terms of virtual reality and new forms of online communication that change things further, right? TikTok, if you follow and watch people or you send and exchange things using TikTok together, another example, right, of some of the ways that people engage online. This whole Pentagon leak, all that stuff that's been going on, that originated from a Minecraft Discord server where one member of that server actually was involved with the US government and decided to leak intelligence. So like, you know, a lot of this online communication is deeply connected to current events. So wrap up for today, using that schedule and what your assigned theory is, take some time to start to prepare and think about what you might do. Talked about social information processing today and how it makes the case for our relationships. On Friday, we'll talk about agenda setting theory. So please pass forward or email your group work with your group member name on it. Have a great rest of your Wednesday, and I'll see you again for Friday's class. Thanks.